Every morning at 6:30, David's alarm would buzz him awake. He didn't need it anymore, really. After 15 years of the same routine, his body had learned to wake up on its own. But he kept the alarm anyway, just in case. Old habits die hard, and David was a man who believed in being reliable. The drive to Lincoln Elementary took exactly 12 minutes. David knew this because he'd timed it hundreds of times during different traffic patterns, different weather conditions, different seasons. In winter, it took 13 minutes because of the ice. In spring, when the cherry trees bloomed along Maple Street, it sometimes took 14 because he'd slow down to look at the flowers. His wife used to tease him about this, saying he was getting soft in his old age. The school building stood quiet and empty when David pulled into the parking lot. He loved this time of day. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the brick walls a warm orange color. No children's laughter echoed from the playground yet. No teachers rushed through the hallways with their arms full of papers. Just peace and quiet. David would unlock the main entrance and step inside, breathing in the familiar smell of cleaning supplies and old textbooks. The hallways stretched out before him, polished and ready for another day of chaos. But for now, everything was calm. Then he would wait for Joe. Joe had been cleaning this school for 23 years. 23 years of arriving at exactly 7 o'clock every morning, his old pickup truck rumbling into the parking lot like clockwork. David could hear that truck from inside the building. The engine made a particular sound, a kind of gentle coughing that meant Joe was here, ready to start another day. The first thing you'd notice about Joe was his smile. It didn't matter if it was Monday morning or Friday afternoon, if it was sunny or raining, if the kids had made an extra big mess the day before, Joe always smiled. It wasn't a fake smile either, the kind people put on when they have to. It was real, genuine, like he was truly happy to be there. Joe would come through the main entrance, carrying his old metal thermos and wearing his navy blue work uniform. The thermos was dented and scratched, probably older than some of the teachers at the school, but Joe took care of it like it was made of gold. He told David once that his late wife had given it to him on their first wedding anniversary, 45 years ago. "Morning, Dave," Joe would say, his voice carrying a slight accent from the country where he'd grown up. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" And somehow, when Joe said it, even the gloomy days seemed a little brighter. David had learned a lot about Joe over the years. Not because Joe talked much about himself, but because he was the kind of person who revealed his character through his actions. Joe lived alone in a small apartment across town. He had a granddaughter who visited him on weekends. He sent money back to his family in his home country every month. He'd never missed a day of work, not once in 23 years. The two men had developed an easy friendship. They were both early birds, both took pride in their work, both understood the importance of keeping the school running smoothly. David handled the big stuff, the heating and cooling systems, the plumbing problems, the broken windows. Joe handled everything else. And there was a lot of everything else. 400 students attended Lincoln Elementary. 400 kids between the ages of 5 and 11, each one capable of creating an impressive amount of mess in a single day. Juice spills in the cafeteria, muddy footprints in the hallways, crayon marks on the walls, glue stuck to desks, papers scattered everywhere. Joe approached each mess with the same patient attitude. He never complained, never got frustrated, never acted like the work was beneath him. He would simply nod, grab his cart, and get to work. That cart was like Joe's mobile headquarters. It held everything he needed for any cleaning emergency. Mops and brooms, bottles of different cleaning solutions, rolls of paper towels, trash bags, rubber gloves. Joe had organized it perfectly over the years, everything in its proper place. He could find what he needed even in the dark. David had watched Joe work many times. There was something almost artistic about the way he moved through the building. He had a system, a pattern that he followed every single day. First, he'd empty all the trash cans. Then he'd sweep the hallways. After that, he'd mop the floors, starting from the farthest classroom and working his way back to the main entrance. He'd clean the bathrooms, wipe down the water fountains, dust the trophy cases in the front office. Every task was done with care and attention to detail. Joe didn't just clean the school, he maintained it. He noticed things, a loose tile that needed fixing, a light bulb that was starting to flicker, a window that didn't close properly. He'd make notes and report these things to David, helping prevent small problems from becoming big ones. The teachers loved Joe. They'd greet him when they arrived early, thank him when they stayed late. The principal always made sure to include Joe in the holiday celebrations, the staff meetings, the end-of-year parties. Joe was part of the Lincoln Elementary family, but lately David had noticed changes. Small things at first. Joe moving a little, slower down the hallways, taking longer breaks between tasks, his hands shaking slightly when he gripped his mop. The winter had been particularly hard on him. David had seen Joe rubbing his knuckles on cold mornings, his arthritis acting up. Still, Joe never complained. He never asked for help. He just kept showing up, kept doing his job, kept smiling that genuine smile. David respected that about him. In a world where people often looked for the easy way out, Joe represented something different. He represented dedication, reliability, pride in honest work. David had tried to talk to Joe about slowing down, maybe reducing his hours, but Joe would just wave him off. "I'm fine, Dave," he'd say. This old body's got plenty of life left in it. But David could see the truth. Joe was getting older, and the work was getting harder for him. Still, David didn't push. He knew Joe well enough to understand that this job meant everything to him. It wasn't just about the money, though David suspected Joe needed every penny. It was about purpose, about being needed, about being part of something bigger than himself. So, every morning, David would unlock the school and wait for the familiar sound of Joe's truck. He'd listen for the gentle cough of the engine, the slam of the truck door, the shuffle of Joe's feet on the pavement. These sounds had become the soundtrack of David's morning routine, as reliable as the sunrise itself. The school needed Joe, and Joe needed the school. It was a simple arrangement that had worked perfectly for 23 years. David had no reason to think it would ever change, but sometimes life has other plans. Tuesday morning started like any other. David's alarm went off at 6:30, and he rolled out of bed with the same routine he'd followed for 15 years. Coffee first, then a quick shower, then the 12-minute drive to Lincoln Elementary. The weather was crisp and cold, with frost covering the car windows and his breath visible in the morning air. He pulled into the parking lot at 6:55, just like always. The school building looked the same as it did every morning, quiet and peaceful in the early light. David unlocked the main entrance and stepped inside, expecting to hear Joe's truck rumbling into the parking lot any minute now, but 7 o'clock came and went. No truck, no familiar coughing engine. No Joe. David checked his watch, thinking maybe he'd gotten the time wrong somehow. But no, it was definitely past 7. He walked to the front windows and looked out at the empty parking lot. Nothing, just his own car sitting there alone. This was strange. In all the years they'd worked together, Joe had never been late. Not once. The man was more reliable than an atomic clock. David felt a small knot of worry forming in his stomach. Maybe Joe was just running a few minutes behind. These things happened, right? Traffic lights, car trouble, oversleeping. Normal stuff that happened to normal people. David tried to convince himself that everything was fine, but the worry kept growing. 7:15. Still, no Joe. David pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Joe's number. He'd only called Joe at home a few times over the years, usually about scheduled changes or when bad weather might affect their work. Joe always answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful and ready to help with whatever was needed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Then it went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Joe. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll call you back as soon as I can. Have a blessed day." David hung up without leaving a message. Joe always answered his phone, always. The knot in his stomach tightened. 7:30. The first school buses would be arriving soon, and David needed to make sure the building was ready. He couldn't wait for Joe any longer. With a heavy heart, he grabbed his master keys and started his walk through the school. opening the classrooms. It was usually Joe's job. David knew which ones needed to be unlocked first, which teachers arrived early, which rooms had special requirements. But walking through the empty hallways without Joe felt wrong somehow. The building seemed too quiet, too still. David unlocked the main hallway classrooms first, then moved to the kindergarten wing. The little desks and chairs looked lonely without their usual occupants. Artwork covered the walls, colorful drawings of families and houses and dogs. Under normal circumstances, Joe would be wheeling his cart down this hallway right about now, humming softly to himself as he prepared for another day. By 8 o'clock, the buses started arriving. David watched through the windows as children poured out, their backpacks bouncing, their voices creating that familiar morning chaos. Teachers began arriving too, parking their cars and hurrying toward the building with their arms full of lesson plans and coffee cups. The first teacher to notice was Mrs. Peterson, who taught 3rd grade. She always got to school early to prepare for the day, and she always stopped to chat with Joe when she saw him in the hallways. "Morning, David," she said, looking around the empty entrance. "Where's Joe today? I wanted to thank him for fixing that wobbly desk in my classroom yesterday." David tried to keep his voice casual. "He's running a little late this morning." "I'm sure he'll be here soon." But even as he said it, David didn't believe it. Joe didn't run late, ever. More teachers arrived and more questions followed. Joe was a beloved figure at Lincoln Elementary. He knew every teacher's name, remembered their birthdays, asked about their families. His absence was noticed immediately. "Is Joe feeling okay?" asked Mr. Rodriguez from the 5th grade. "Haven't seen Joe this morning," commented Miss Chung from the art room. "That's unusual for him." "Hope Joe's not getting sick," worried Mrs. Williams from the office. David found himself making excuses, creating explanations that sounded reasonable but felt hollow. Car trouble, doctor's appointment, family emergency, anything to avoid saying the truth, which was that he had no idea where Joe was or why he wasn't there. As the morning wore on, David tried calling Joe's number 3 more times. Each call went straight to voicemail. The cheerful message began to sound mocking, promising a callback that never came. During his lunch break, David drove across town to Joe's apartment complex. It was a modest building, the kind of place where working people lived when they couldn't afford anything fancier. David had only been there once before, when Joe had invited him over for dinner on his birthday 2 years ago. Joe's apartment was on the 2nd floor. David climbed the concrete stairs and knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. The parking lot was full of cars, but David didn't see Joe's old pickup truck anywhere. David asked the apartment manager if she'd seen Joe recently. She was a friendly woman who seemed to know all her tenants. "Joe? No, I haven't seen him since Sunday," she said. "He usually waves to me when he leaves for work in the mornings, but I haven't seen him the past couple of days. Is everything okay?" David didn't know how to answer that question. He thanked the manager and drove back to the school, his worry now mixed with genuine fear. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The afternoon dragged by. David tried to focus on his regular duties, but his mind kept wandering to Joe. Where was he? Why hadn't he called? What could have happened? The students seemed to sense something was off too. Several of them asked where Joe was. The kids loved Joe almost as much as the teachers did. He always had time to talk to them, to help them when they dropped their books, to listen to their stories about lost teeth and new pets. He was like a grandfather to many of them. "Where's the nice man who cleans our classroom?" asked a kindergartner. "Is Joe coming back tomorrow?" The truth was, he didn't know if Joe was coming back tomorrow. He didn't know anything. As the final bell rang and the last bus pulled away, David found himself alone in the school again. The building felt empty without Joe's presence. The hallways that should have been cleaned and mopped were still showing the day's worth of activity. Scuff marks on the floors, fingerprints on the windows, trash bins that needed emptying. David realized he'd have to call the substitute janitorial service. The school couldn't function without proper cleaning. The health department requirements alone meant that bathrooms had to be maintained, floors had to be mopped, trash had to be collected, but calling for a substitute felt like giving up on Joe. It felt like admitting that something terrible had happened. David sat in his office as the sun set outside the windows. His phone lay on the desk in front of him, Joe's number still displayed on the screen. He stared at it, willing it to ring, willing Joe's familiar voice to come through and explain everything. But the phone remained silent and David was left with nothing but questions and a growing sense that tomorrow would bring answers he wasn't ready to hear. Wednesday morning felt different from the moment David woke up. The house was quiet, his coffee tasted bitter, and even the familiar 12-minute drive to school seemed longer somehow. Yesterday's worry had grown into something heavier overnight, a constant weight pressing down on his chest. He pulled into the parking lot just before 7, scanning the empty spaces for Joe's old pickup truck. Nothing. The lot was as empty as it had been the day before. David sat in his car for a moment, staring at the spot where Joe usually parked. A small puddle of oil marked the place where Joe's truck had dripped for years. Leaving a permanent stain on the asphalt, David unlocked the school and stepped inside. The familiar smell of cleaning supplies now mixed with something else. The building felt neglected, even after just one day without Joe's careful attention. The floors weren't as clean, the trash cans were overflowing, and there was a general sense of things being slightly out of place. He'd made the call to the substitute cleaning service yesterday evening. They'd promised to send someone this morning. But David wasn't holding his breath. Substitute workers never cared about the job the way Joe did. They'd do the minimum required and move on to the next assignment. The school would be technically clean, but it wouldn't feel right. David was in his office, trying to focus on paperwork when he heard it. A soft tapping sound, barely audible over the hum of the heating system. At first, he thought it might be a branch hitting the window, but the sound came again. Deliberate, rhythmic, someone was knocking on the main entrance door. He checked his watch, 7:15. Too early for teachers, too early for delivery trucks. Who would be knocking at this hour? David walked through the empty hallways toward the main entrance, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Through the glass doors he could see a small figure standing outside. A child, he realized. A little girl with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a backpack that looked too big for her small frame. David's first thought was that she was an early student, maybe dropped off by a parent who had to get to work. It happened sometimes, though usually the parents called ahead to let the school know. He unlocked the door and opened it, ready to explain that the school didn't open for students until 8 o'clock, but when he looked down at the girl, something in her expression stopped him from speaking. She wasn't looking around with the casual curiosity of a student. Her brown eyes were serious, determined, and there was something almost adult about the way she stood there, holding a folded piece of paper in her small hands. "Are you Mr. Martinez?" she asked, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. David was surprised she knew his name. "Yes, I am. Are you okay, sweetheart? Are you lost?" The girl shook her head firmly. "No, I'm not lost. I'm here to help." "Clean the school." David blinked, certain he'd misheard her. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I'm here to help clean the school," she repeated, her voice a little stronger this time. "My grandpa can't come to work anymore, but I know how to do his job. He taught me." David felt his heart skip a beat. Grandpa, could she mean Joe? He knelt down to her level, trying to keep his voice gentle and calm. "What's your name, honey?" "I'm Maria," she said, extending the folded paper toward him. "My grandpa is Joe. He's in the hospital, but he made me promise to bring you this. He said the school needs to be clean for all the kids, and he was worried you'd be angry with him for not coming to work." David's hands trembled as he took the paper. Joe in the hospital. All of his worst fears were suddenly confirmed, but mixed with relief at finally knowing what had happened. He looked at Maria, this brave little girl who had somehow made her way to the school before dawn, and felt a wave of emotion wash over him. "Maria, how did you get here?" he asked. "Where are your parents?" "I walked," she said simply. "It took me a long time, but Grandpa showed me the way once. My mom works at the hospital now, taking care of Grandpa." She doesn't know I came here. She thinks I'm still sleeping. David's mind raced. This child had walked across town in the dark by herself to deliver a message from Joe, the dedication. The love, the sense of responsibility she was showing was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "Maria, can you tell me what happened to your grandpa?" David asked gently. Her small face crumpled slightly, the adult composure slipping for just a moment. "He got sick on Sunday night. Really sick. Mom said his heart was having trouble, and they had to take him to the hospital in an ambulance. The doctors are helping him, but he keeps worrying about his job. He keeps saying he needs to get back to work, that the school needs him." David felt tears prick at his eyes. Even from a hospital bed, Joe was thinking about his responsibilities, worried about letting down the school and the students he'd served for so many years. "He wrote you a letter," Maria continued, pointing to the paper in David's hands. "He made me promise to bring it to you and tell you that I can help. He's been teaching me how to clean things the right way. I know where all the supplies are kept, and I know which classrooms need special attention." David looked down at the folded paper but didn't open it yet. He was trying to process everything Maria had told him, trying to understand the full scope of what was happening. "Maria, how long has your grandpa been teaching you about cleaning?" he asked. "Since the summer," she said. "He said he was getting older and wanted to make sure someone knew how to do his job right. He showed me how to mop floors without leaving streaks, how to clean windows so they don't have spots, how to organize the supply closet so everything is easy to find. He said it was important work, making sure the school was clean and safe for all the kids." David's heart broke a little more with each word. Joe had been preparing for this, training his granddaughter because he knew his body was failing him. But he'd never intended for Maria to actually do the work herself. He'd probably hoped to have more time to make proper arrangements to ensure the school wouldn't be left without proper care. "I brought my own cleaning supplies," Maria said, pointing to her oversized backpack. "I have rags and spray bottles and everything. I know I'm small, but I can reach most places if I use a step stool. Grandpa showed me how to be safe and not hurt myself." David looked at this determined little girl, this child who had walked miles in the dark to honor her grandfather's commitment, and felt overwhelmed by the love and loyalty she was demonstrating. But he also felt a deep sadness for the burden she was trying to carry. "Maria, that's very thoughtful of you," he said carefully, "but cleaning the school is a big job for a grown-up. It's not something a little girl should have to worry about." Maria's face fell. "But Grandpa needs this job. He told me that if he can't work, he won't be able to pay for his medicine or his apartment. He said the school is depending on him and he can't let everyone down." David's throat tightened. Joe's fear wasn't just about losing his job, it was about losing his livelihood, his purpose, his place in the world. And somehow, this little girl had taken on the responsibility of protecting all of that. "Can you read me the letter?" Maria asked quietly. "Grandpa's handwriting is hard for me to understand sometimes, but he said it was important that you know everything." David nodded, his hands still shaking slightly as he carefully unfolded the paper. The letter was written in Joe's familiar handwriting, though it was shakier than usual, probably written from his hospital bed. David's hands trembled as he held Joe's letter. Maria stood beside him, her small face upturned with expectation and worry. The morning sun was starting to filter through the school's front windows, casting long shadows across the floor where they stood. "Would you like to sit down while I read this?" David asked gently, gesturing toward the bench near the entrance. Maria nodded and climbed onto the wooden bench, her legs dangling over the edge. Her backpack sat beside her, bulging with the cleaning supplies she'd brought. David sat down next to her, the letter feeling heavier in his hands than it should have. He carefully unfolded the paper, recognizing Joe's handwriting immediately. But Maria was right, it was shakier than usual. The letters were uneven, some words crossed out and rewritten, as if Joe had struggled to find the right words or his hand had been unsteady. "Dear Dave," the letter began, and David could almost hear Joe's voice speaking the words. "I'm sorry I couldn't call you myself. The doctors here say I need to rest, but I can't stop thinking about the school. I know you're probably worried, and I hate that I've left you in a tough spot. That's not fair to you or to the kids and teachers who depend on us." David paused, glancing at Maria. She was watching him intently, her hands folded in her lap like she was in church. "I had a heart attack Sunday night," David continued reading. "A big one, the doctors say. They're taking good care of me, but I don't know when I'll be able to come back to work. Maybe a few weeks, maybe longer. The truth is I'm scared, Dave. Not just about being sick, but about losing my job." David felt his throat tighten. Joe's fear was right there on the paper, raw and honest. "I know you're a good man, and I know you wouldn't fire someone just for getting sick. But I also know the school has to keep running. You can't wait around for an old man to get better when there are 400 kids counting on us to keep their school clean and safe." Maria shifted beside him, and David noticed she was trying not to cry. This brave little girl had probably heard these same fears from her grandfather, had seen his worry and decided to do something about it. "I've been training Maria to help me with the cleaning," the letter continued. "Not because I planned for this to happen, but because I wanted her to understand the importance of hard work. I wanted her to see that every job matters, no matter how small it might seem to other people." David looked at Maria again. She was biting her lower lip, the way children do when they're trying to be strong. She knows where everything is kept. She knows which classrooms need extra attention on Mondays because the weekend makes them dusty. She knows that Mrs. Peterson's room needs the desks wiped down with special cleaner because one of her students has allergies. She knows that the kindergarten bathrooms need to be checked twice a day because the little ones sometimes make messes. As David read, he realized Joe had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone knew. The detailed instructions weren't just about cleaning, they were about caring for the school community. Maria knows that the art room needs the sinks cleaned with a special brush because paint gets stuck in the drains. She knows that the gym floor needs to be mopped in a particular pattern so it doesn't streak. She knows that the library books need to be dusted gently because some of them are old and fragile. David's voice caught slightly as he read. Joe had been teaching Maria not just the mechanics of cleaning, but the heart of what it meant to take care of a place where children learned and grew. "I'm not asking you to let Maria do my job," the letter continued. "I know that wouldn't be right. A little girl shouldn't have to work like that. But I wanted you to know that she understands what needs to be done. She understands that this work matters." Maria finally spoke up, her voice small but determined. "I told Grandpa I could do it all myself. I told him I was strong enough. But he said that wasn't the point. He said the point was that I understood why the work was important." David nodded, continuing to read. "I've been doing this job for 23 years. Dave, 23 years of waking up early and coming to Lincoln Elementary. It's not just a job to me, it's my purpose. It's how I contribute to something bigger than myself." The letter went on to detail every aspect of Joe's daily routine. Where he kept the extra supplies, which bathrooms needed attention first, how to properly mix the cleaning solutions, when to change the filters in the water fountains, where to find the special wax for the hallway floors. "The main supply closet had everything organized by type," David read aloud. "The mops are on the left side. The cleaners are on the middle shelves, and the paper supplies are on the right. There's a stepladder behind the door for reaching the high shelves. Maria knows where everything goes, but it was more than just practical instructions. Joe had included personal notes about the people who made the school special. Mrs. Peterson always works late on Thursdays preparing for Friday tests. She likes her classroom extra clean on Thursday nights because it helps her think better. Mr. Rodriguez sometimes eats lunch in his room when he's grading papers. He's neat, but he always forgets to empty his trash can." David realized that Joe didn't just clean the school, he knew the school. He understood the rhythms and habits of everyone who worked there. He cared about making their lives a little easier. "The principal, Mrs. Thompson, has been talking about budget cuts," the letter continued. "I know times are tough, and I know the school has to make difficult decisions. If you need to replace me with someone younger, someone who doesn't have an old man's aches and pains, I understand. I just hope whoever takes over will care about the job as much as I do. Maria tugged on David's sleeve. That's why I came here, she whispered. Grandpa keeps saying they might not need him anymore. He's afraid that being sick will give them a reason to find someone else. David's heart ached for both Joe and Maria. Joe's dedication to his work was being overshadowed by his fear of losing it, and Maria was trying to protect the grandfather she obviously adored. I know I'm asking a lot, the letter went on, but if there's any way I can keep my job, I promise I'll work twice as hard when I get better. I'll come in early, stay late, do whatever it takes. This school is my family, Dave. The teachers are. My friends, the kids are like my grandchildren. I can't imagine my life without this place. The letter was getting harder to read, both because of Joe's increasingly shaky handwriting and because of the emotion in his words. Maria wanted to come to the school and clean everything herself. She's got such a big heart, that girl. She thinks she can solve all the world's problems if she just works hard enough. I told her that's not how things work, but I'm proud of her for wanting to try. David looked at Maria, who was now openly crying. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she wasn't making any sound. She was trying to be brave, just like her grandfather had taught her. If something happens to me, the letter continued, I want you to know that working at Lincoln Elementary has been the best job of my life. I've been proud to serve this school, proud to be part of this community. Thank you for treating me like family, Dave. Thank you for making an old janitor feel like his work mattered. The letter ended with a simple plea. Please don't fire me. I promise I'll be back as soon as I can. The school needs to be clean for the kids, and I need this job to survive. Maria knows everything I know. She can help whoever you hire temporarily. Just please don't give my job away. David folded the letter carefully, his hands shaking more than they had when he'd started reading. He looked at Maria, this incredible little girl who had walked across town in the dark to deliver her grandfather's desperate message. Maria, he said softly, your grandfather's job will be waiting for him when he gets better. I promise you. That Maria's face lit up with hope and relief. Really? You mean it? I mean it, David said, and as he spoke the words, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Joe wasn't just an employee, he was family. And family didn't abandon each other when times got tough. David sat on the bench holding Joe's letter, looking at Maria's hopeful face, and felt something break open inside his chest. It wasn't just sadness or worry anymore. It was something deeper, something that reached into the core of what it meant. To be human and care for one another, here was this little girl, barely tall enough to reach the water fountain, who had walked miles in the dark because she loved her grandfather so much. She had listened to his fears, absorbed his worries, and decided that somehow, someway she could fix everything. The pure love and determination in her actions was overwhelming. David thought about all the times he'd watched Joe work over the years. How Joe never complained when kids tracked mud through the hallways he'd just mopped. How he always had a kind word for the stressed teachers working late. How he remembered every custodian's birthday and always brought homemade cookies to share during the holidays. Joe wasn't just a janitor. He was the heart of Lincoln Elementary in ways that most people never even realized. Maria, David said, his voice thick with emotion, what you did today. Coming here to help your grandfather, that's one of the bravest things I've ever seen. Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I just want Grandpa to get better. And not worry so much. When he worries, it makes his heart hurt worse. David felt tears building behind his own eyes. The innocence of that statement, the way Maria connected her grandfather's emotional pain to his physical illness, showed a wisdom beyond her years. You know what? David said, standing up and extending his hand to Maria. I think your grandfather would feel a lot better if he knew that everyone at this school cares about him. Would you like to help me show him that? Maria nodded eagerly, taking David's hand. What can we do? David led her toward his office, his mind already forming a plan. First, we're going to call your mom and let her know where you are. She's probably worried sick about you. I left her a note, Maria said quietly. I told her I had something important to do for Grandpa. I'm sure she's still worried, David said gently. Moms always worry when their children aren't where they expect them to be. They reached David's office and he picked up his phone. What's your mom's number, sweetheart? Maria recited the number from memory and David dialed it. A woman answered. On the first ring, her voice frantic. Hello? Who is this? Hi, this is David Martinez from Lincoln Elementary School. I have Maria here with me and she's perfectly safe. Maria? Oh my goodness, I've been looking everywhere for her. I thought, when I couldn't find her this morning, I was terrified. Something had happened to her. She's fine, David assured her. She came to the school to deliver a message from Joe. She's been very brave, but I think she'd like to talk to you. David handed the phone to Maria, who immediately started explaining everything to her mother in rapid Spanish mixed with English. David couldn't understand all of it, but he could hear the relief in her mother's voice through the phone. After a few minutes, Maria handed the phone back to David. Mr. Martinez, Maria's mother said, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would do something like this. She's been so worried about her grandfather since he got sick. There's nothing to apologize for, David said. Maria did something incredible. Today, she showed more loyalty and love than most adults ever do. But I think she needs to come home now, and I'd like to visit Joe in the hospital later if that's okay. Of course, Maria's mother said. I'll come pick her up right away, and Mr. Martinez, thank you for being kind to her. Papa has talked about you so many times over the years. He considers you a real friend. After hanging up, David turned back to Maria. Your mom is coming to get you. But before she gets here, I want to make some phone calls. I want to make sure your grandfather knows that his job will be here when he's ready to come back. David picked up the phone again and dialed. The principal's number. Mrs. Thompson answered immediately. David, what's going on? I heard Joe hasn't been in for a couple of days. Mrs. Thompson, I need to tell you about Joe's situation, David said. He explained everything, from Joe's heart attack to Maria's early morning visit. As he talked, he could hear Mrs. Thompson's intake of breath. That poor man, she said when David finished. And that brave little girl. David, you tell Joe that his job is secure. I don't care if he needs 6 months to recover, that position belongs to him. What about the budget discussions? David asked. Joe mentioned he was worried about cutbacks. Joe's position was never in question, Mrs. Thompson said firmly. We might have to make some difficult decisions about other things, but Joe is family. We don't abandon family. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I think I'll visit him in the hospital today and let him know. Personally, tell him that we all miss him, she said. And David? See if he needs anything? Medical bills, groceries, help with rent. We can organize something among the staff. After hanging up with the principal, David made several more calls. He called the substitute cleaning service and arranged for temporary help until Joe returned. He called Mrs. Peterson, who immediately volunteered to organize a meal train for Joe's family. He called Mr. Rodriguez, who offered to set up a fundraising account to help with medical expenses, within an hour. The entire Lincoln Elementary family was mobilized to help one of their own. Teachers were volunteering to visit Joe in the hospital. The PTA president was organizing a care package. Even the bus drivers were asking how they could help. Maria watched all of this with wide eyes. All these people want to help Grandpa? She asked. Your grandfather has been taking care of this school for 23 years, David explained. Now it's time for the school to take care of him. When Maria's mother arrived, she was a small woman with the same determined expression as her daughter. She hugged Maria tightly, scolding her gently in Spanish for leaving without permission. But David could see the pride in her eyes, too. Mrs. Martinez, she said to David, I don't know how to thank you for being so kind to Maria and to my father. Your father is one of the best men I've ever known, David replied. And your daughter is just like him. She loves deeply and isn't afraid to act on that love. That afternoon, David drove to the hospital. He found Joe in a small room on the cardiac unit, hooked up to various monitors that beeped softly. Joe looked older and more fragile than David had ever seen him, but his eyes lit up when David walked in. "Dave," Joe said, his voice weak but warm, "I'm so sorry about missing work. I know you must be angry with me." David pulled a chair close to Joe's bed and sat down. "Joe, I'm not angry. I'm concerned about you. And I have some things to tell you that I think will make you feel better." David told Joe about Maria's visit, about reading his letter, about the school's response to his situation. As he talked, Joe's eyes filled with tears. "Maria walked all that way by herself?" Joe asked, his voice breaking. "She loves you more than anything in the world," David said. "And she's not the only one." "Joe, you have no idea how much you mean to everyone at Lincoln Elementary." David pulled out his phone and showed Joe the photos that teachers had been sending all day. Pictures of handmade get-well cards from students. Photos of flowers being delivered to the school office. Screenshots of the growing fundraising account. "The whole school is rallying around you," David said. "Your job isn't going anywhere. Take all the time you need to get better. We'll be here when you're ready to come back." Joe sobbed then, deep, relieved sobs that seemed to come from years of carrying worry alone. "I was so scared," he admitted. "I thought I'd lose everything. I thought the school would be better off without me." "Joe," David said, gripping his friend's hand, "you're not just an employee, you're family. And families don't abandon each other when times get tough." As David left the hospital that evening, he thought about the power of love and community. Maria's brave walk through the dark had illuminated something beautiful about human nature. When people truly care for each other, when they see past job, titles, and social differences to the heart of what matters, incredible things can happen. Joe would recover. David was certain of it now. He would return to Lincoln Elementary, and the school would be whole again. But more than that, everyone involved had learned something important about the bonds that hold communities together. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal how much we mean to each other. Sometimes it takes a little girl's brave walk through the darkness to light up the love that was always there, waiting to shine.